we saw in the case of former Yugoslavia that, at least to some degree, the U.S. government tried to leave religion out of its analyses or to minimize the role that it might be playing in the situation. With Sri Lanka, how does the way the international community how should the international community approach the issue of religion in the role that it might or may not be playing in violence there? Does talking about Sri Lanka in religious terms just inflame divisions that might actually, that are just being used a certain way, and when it's really about the economic and individual interests that you spoke about, or is it leaving out a central element that that is really motivating a lot of people, and it's important to understand?
If you take up the first part of the question, the international community is one of those words in Sri Lanka that is also sort of classified along with all foreign things, like along with Kentucky Fried Chicken. And so they are all, so if there is going to be any productive action on the part of the international community, it has to be approached you have to approach it in a very, very sensitive way, very kind of disguised manner. There could be some indirect support, for example, to encourage I have been advocating personally figures comparable to these great figures, not Mandela's stature, but small scale Mandelas you can find in Sri Lanka. So if the international community, the Americans for example, can encourage some of these people and say, why don't you do this, do that, and maybe they can even use some guidance in about what exactly might be according to their own experience might be effective. So if there is any international input, I think it has to be in some sort of way, some sort of nuanced way. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the second part of your question.
How they should look at the issue of religion specifically?
Oh, like
whether or not emphasizing that it's that looking at it in religious terms is just inflaming tensions that are based on divisions that are being used instead of what the violence is really about, or whether or not the international community should talk about things in religious terms because that's what's motivating people.
No, I'm still unclear about the question, because are you saying that since real motivation for violence is not religious but economic and so on, and therefore the international community should do something about that? Is that what you're asking?
Should they leave religion in or out of their analyses?
I think they should keep religion in the analysis, because again this brings up a very important question which I had no time to raise, which is what do we mean by religion actually? Now when we talk, for example, we talked about Buddhism as if it is just one thing. That's not the case at all. There are not only different Buddhisms in different parts of the world, but within Sri Lanka it's very clear that the paper you read, Tambaya's, is making a distinction between this kind of paradigm that I talked about, this particular myths around what he calls political Buddhism, and this is although the term political Buddhism has been used to describe these recent things, but in fact it is quite old. And now in the morning in my discussion with Lisa, we quoted this example of a king going back to the 2nd century where he proclaims that he is about to wage war on the Tamils, and he says this war is not for myself, I am waging it not for my glory but for the sake of Buddhism. And I remarked that in this election season, this should sound familiar to you, because what the king is saying is that it's my religion first, me second, but so this has been there for a long time. So and Tambaya also makes a distinction between what he calls he uses the term moral principle and cultural possession. Now, Buddhism, presumably in the Buddha's own original sense, is a moral principle, but in fact it has been converted into a cultural possession, where the possession of it becomes part of your identity and something to flaunt about and to proclaim to the world that you are the custodians of this great noble doctrine, but you do not do anything with it. You just use it, and in fact use it in irresponsible ways to simply to oppress other people, and in the sense of making it part of your oppressive identity. And so Buddhism, I mean, when you talk about religion, therefore you have to obviously talk about the possibilities of using the moral principle as possibly, you know, some instrument of changing the situation. And to do that, again, I think what is important is you have to you have to find an effective link, and that is, again, I think it resonates what Peter was saying, because there is no sense in having a noble idea. There must be some effective method of translating that into action, to effective social action. And this is a great insight of Max Weber's Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, where it is not the case that he said you know, Protestantism causes capitalism. He laid out a series of intervening variables which illustrate clearly how this, what he called, you know, how the but it's not the not the Lutheran but the Calvinistic Reformation, the question of predestination, and how it led to what he called the inner isolation of the individual, and then the search for, and after Calvin told his questioners that there's no way to know whether you are one of the damned or one of the saved, and when he was pressed, his only answer was that there's really no way of knowing, but the only you can have some sort of inkling of it if you feel a sense of total dedication in work. When you do, in other words, when you work in your mundane employment, if you feel nothing but the sense that you are working in the glory of God, then that's an inkling that you are one of the saved. So naturally, everybody wanted to have that feeling. You keep working and working and working and working. And of course, he also advocated asceticism. That means that you work and produce, but you don't consume. The arithmetic is very clear, because it is when you add and don't subtract, you have what is called the accumulation of capital. So there is capitalism. So you have an effective series, you know. So you cannot just simply have a noble idea and then expect it to work, but you must find some mechanism. And I think both of we are suggesting that the possibility of actual individuals like little Mandelas. If you can find little Mandelas and, you know, and sort of post them here and there, and then see whether they can do some conspiracy to, you know, to do this.